having a small snack with protein, carbs before bedtime may be good for athletes in particular who could be waking up due to low blood sugar levels.
Here we are, Dr. Amy Bender. Thank you. Welcome to Health Hacker Life. Excited to have you.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're going to dive into all things sleep, recovery, rest, the R&R that we all need in this world, all too much. And you know a thing or two about getting high quality sleep. And so I'm going to ask you some great questions today to help unpack how people can take their overall approach to sleep and recovery to the next level, because more and more it seems so incredibly important as like a huge lever to affect overall performance and someone's health. So your work in the world, you're director of sleep science at Absolute Rest, the company called Absolute Rest. Tell us, what is Absolute Rest about, and what does your role entail?
Yeah, so Absolute Rest is a company to optimize sleep in high performers. So they work with elite athletes, movie stars, C-suite executives, even the everyday individual as well. And it entails kind of a very detailed sleep analysis. So we're looking at sleep with Aura data, for example, but also looking at EEG data, assessing for sleep disorders, even analyzing the room environment with special sensors, just to really get a detailed picture of how someone is sleeping and then how we can influence or optimize in these different instances. So I'm the director of sleep science there, and kind of managing the research department and figuring out how we can use research and data to help influence how people sleep as well.
Wow. Well, good for you. It's such important work. And, in our line of work on the nutrition side for athletes, like we definitely do our best to support with recovery from a nutrition standpoint and sleep where we can. And I'm also always looking to hear how people are sleeping from our athletes, and because athletes specifically with time zone hopping go through so much on their bodies with travel. And I mean, it's crazy, and definitely speaks to that the stress on their body and what they're paid for what they go through is, they're worth every penny of what they're paid for on their contracts, because of the lifestyle that they go through, how rigorous it is, during the season. How did you get into sleep personally? What made you passionate about the world of sleep?
Yeah, my aunt actually was a sleep technologist, and I was kind of transitioning. I got my degree in psychology. I was looking for kind of a career transition, and she invited me to her sleep lab and hooked up a patient with electrodes. And then we were looking at what those physiological signals translated to on the screen. She showed me how to score the sleep stages, and it was just fascinating to me. So I literally called every single sleep lab in my area, because she was in Portland, Oregon, and I was in Spokane, and tried to volunteer as much as I could, and ended up landing a job at the Sleep and Performance Research Center as the lead sleep technologist. And this center was focused on sleep deprivation. So it was research related to sleep deprivation. And we actually ran studies where we sleep deprived people for 62 hours. So 2 full nights without sleep. And so I was involved in training the research assistants on how to hook up the participants, and I was scoring the sleep data and analyzing the sleep data. And then wanted to get my master's and PhD. So I did that at the same lab. and really wanted to combine my passion for sport as well. So I am a former college basketball athlete. I did an Ironman. I've done some mountaineering and really wanted to kind of combine my passion for sleep and athletics, and ended up in Calgary where I was working with Canadian Olympic team athletes and kind of expanded out to professional athletes, college athletes since then. So, yeah, that's how I kind of ended up in this area, trying to optimize sleep in athletes and high performers.
Love it. So you were a hooper.
I was, yes. I started at the community college level, and then I transferred to Cal State San Bernardino, which is Division II.
Hmm.
But I ended up in the Hall of Fame at the community college level, so it's kind of a cool.
What? Wow. I didn't know I was interviewing a Hall of Famer today. That's impressive.
Yes, thanks.
That's amazing. Congrats. Well, so your personal passion around physical activity, extra, athletics, sports, and sleep. You were wondering how do I blend this together into one happy marriage, and that kind of sweet spot of like dharma where passion and purpose and expertise align, and I love it. So you found it, and you've been doing it kind of on your own and your own work, working with teams and athletes directly, I think, and then also now with absolute rest. So you're talking about these electrodes that your aunt was, I can only imagine like what that's like to like your mind, I'm sure, was like just blown as you're learning from your aunt and seeing like what we can visually like see the different sleep stages and neurochemistry and everything that's going on related to sleep. What year was that? Like when did you first discover that?
Oh goodness. Well, I've been in the sleep field about 17 years now.
Okay.
So,
Got it.
yeah, it was a while back.
So has the sleep field changed a lot over the last 17 years? Like at Absolute Rest, you're talking about all the data you're collecting on the analysis side on for your clients. What does some of that objective data look like, and how are you capturing that?
Hmm. Yes, I think although I would say the sleep field is somewhat in its infancy, REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep was discovered in the 1950s. So we aren't even approaching 100 years right now as to what we're learning, and we're continuing learning things. I try and go to the sleep conferences every year, and of course, like there's all this very interesting things that are happening, and using machine learning and those kind of things to really help optimize sleep in individuals. So yeah, I would say it's continually evolving for sure. But again, it still is in its infancy, so I think there's a lot that can be discovered.
Yeah, well, and the data is in a lot of ways, to some extent, is democratized to the individual. With I'm not wearing it now. I mostly just wear the Aura Ring. Now I do when I'm sleeping. I wonder if that can throw off the, as my wife would say, algorithm, even out the algorithm. Pronouncing that word is fun. Like if you're not recording physical activity level on the Aura Ring, do you use an Aura Ring?
I do, yes, I have an Aura Ring.
Do you wear it like all throughout the day?
I do, yeah. I mean, I guess I haven't really looked into the details on the validity of the data. I think you can get a lot with just wearing it at night. But again, we have to understand the limitations of the Aura Ring and the
Of
data that
course.
we're looking at.
So let's talk about that, right? Because I had interviewed a prior guest 3-4 years ago when I had previously stage one of me being a podcaster, and we talked about how you need to look at medical grade data, not just this lifestyle data, that you can buy from a company and just have it on an app on your phone. Tell us about some of the medical grade data that, EEG data that, you mentioned hooking up electrodes. Like, what does it look like for you guys at Absolute Rest? What technology are you using to gather data? And what are the data points? that are important?
Yeah, I think the wearables can help us looking at long-term data collection across time. It can help potentially link lifestyle factors with changes in sleep, although I think there's a lot more that needs to be done in that area. But when we're talking about sleep disorders, an Aura ring isn't going to really give you that information, valid information as to how well you're sleeping during the night. And so we use technology looking at polysomnography. So that's multiple signals that we're looking at to assess sleep across the night. EEG is one of them. So we're looking at brainwave activity.
Right.
We're looking at eye movements during the night. We're looking at breathing, breathing activity through the nose, also respiratory effort. We're also looking at muscle activity, of the chin, which helps us determine REM sleep, for example, but also muscle activity of the legs, because some people might kick during the night. And so this kind of polysomnography has traditionally been done in the laboratory, but there's technology that we're using at Absolute Rest where we can measure that in the home where sleep is occurring. And we know that people sleep differently in a new environment. So that's really important to us, is to be able to measure sleep accurately in the home, because when you're in a laboratory, you're sleeping by yourself, you don't have interruptions, you don't have potentially light coming through the there's probably no windows, um, based on where I was at when we were talking about this sleep deprivation lab. So again, we're trying to accurately measure sleep within the person's home environment with that type of technology. But we're also looking at environmental sensors. So we use environmental sensors where we can detect light levels during the night, we can track noise levels and see, for example, AC kicks on and we see, this noise level and temperature increase, and potentially leading to awakenings. And so we can really capture that full environment, pollutants, all of those things to really, really get a good idea of how someone is sleeping in their own home environment.
Interesting. So you get like a baseline of these environmental data points in addition to like the EEG, and then do you like change things up to like run experiments to see how some of the objective data changes based on change to the environment? Like what does that look like?
Exactly, exactly. So it's for example, we were working with someone where they're in Arizona in the middle of the summer, and we're looking at their temperature data, and it's hovering about 77, which is really high for someone to sleep soundly, because when we fall asleep, our temperature drops. And so we want to keep our sleep environment very cool, dark, and quiet. And in this case, we're like, hey, can you adjust that temperature lower and run these types of experiments where now let's look down the road after they've had a chance to adjust these different things, how sleep has changed in the right direction.
Right. Yeah, that's probably like a one of the low hanging fruit, like easiest things to adjust if someone's not like sleeping at the optimal temperature. And at least in my experience, like that's something like my wife and I notice the most is how temperature can affect our sleep. And so I think you're talking about the air conditioning. Of course, those in Arizona, whew, they definitely need that air conditioning. We don't have it actually. So we're in the mountains and outside of Boulder at about 8,000 feet in our home. We don't have built-in air conditioning. So we're because of that. I mean, there's pros and cons to that. I mean, there can be some deleterious effects of air conditioning if it's not used properly. It
Hmm.
can affect lung health or overall immune system. I don't know a ton about that, but um, for us, since we can't change the dial on our ambient room temperature, our big focus is cooling down, like you said, cool, dark, quiet, like having things generally as cool as possible. Now I run a little warmer than my wife, and so I don't know if you've seen a trend with men versus women, but I generally like it colder than she does. And so the biggest tool we use for helping us lock in optimal temperature is the sleep cooling mat that goes over our
Yes.
mattress. Yeah, we use Chili Sleep. The new Dock Pro device is so powerfully cold. Is that a big tool that you see being helpful for people?
Absolutely. Things like Chili Pad or even Eat Sleep has a pod that can go over your bed, where you can really control the temperature. And again, yeah, there may be instances where, for example, I mean, Arizona in the middle of the summer, in this individual too, we actually recommended that Chili Sleep Pad,
Nice.
and they, in particular, they had it kind of, I think there's a function where you can start warm and then it drops, and they were having issues falling asleep. So we're like, hey, let's just start cold here. So yeah, there's a lot you can do. And I'm in Calgary in the mountains as well. So I feel you on the no AC. We don't have AC in our house.
Okay.
It's really hot here. You know, there's only a few days during the summer where it gets really hot and where you would really need it. But even having a fan, having the window open at night to kind of ventilate can help,
Right.
depending on your location.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I often tell my friends or they tell me that I'm a high maintenance sleeper in that, like, I gotta have, I've got my checklist, that's just automatic for me that are like key things. Like when we travel, like we just took a 10-day road trip across country to Michigan. And we drove not only with our three giant dogs, but with our giant Dock Pro devices and our sleep mat from Chili Sleep for the Airbnbs that we were going to be in. And it made all the difference for us in terms of sleep quality, because even though like these homes we're going to be staying in, and for athletes, they, hotel rooms when they're on the road, yeah, it's obviously harder to control when you're traveling, but for the air conditioning for us just doesn't cut it, because when we sleep in the same bed together, we just generate so much body heat together that we're not able to generally. What I had learned, I had interviewed the founder of Chili Sleep, and she had talked about, like you said, you can change the sleep temperature throughout the night, and it's like having like a schedule, like you said, like I think what I've heard is that generally cooler is better when you're trying to fall asleep, and that helps trigger deep sleep, and then generally warmer around REM sleep, which generally happens towards the end of sleep. Am I close to being correct here? Or?
Yes, yes. There's actually been a few studies on high heat capacity mattresses. So those are mattresses that'll absorb that heat, which is similar to what you would have if you have a chili pad or, an eight sleep pod, for
Yeah.
example. And they find that with those high heat capacity mattresses where it's absorbing that heat, that there's more deep sleep involved during those situations. Now I haven't looked into the REM sleep aspect as far as, is that good for increasing temperature? But we do know that deep sleep happens primarily at the beginning of the night. REM sleep happens primarily, although in 90-minute increments or so, a
Sure.
lot of it's going to occur towards the end of the night. And so, yeah, it may be a strategy for you to start that low temperature at the beginning and then maybe increase it as you approach awakening.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how much data is there around having warmer to trigger more REM, but
Hmm.
I do know, I think there's data around the warmth being supportive of waking up, and the cortisol triggering in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Is are you is there validity to that?
Well, yeah, as we fall asleep, as I mentioned, our body temperature drops. And just a note on that too,
Mhm.
a warm bath or shower about or a sauna 60 minutes before bedtime will temporarily increase our core body temperature, but then swiftly decrease, making it easier for sleep. So that's kind of a counterintuitive tip is to try warm about an hour before bedtime, warm bath or shower, sauna, which will then help our body temperature decrease, making it easier for sleep. And then, yes, as we approach awakening, temperature starts to increase, which also relates to cortisol, um, which is very high, in that first 90 minutes upon awakening.
Right.
So something like avoiding caffeine in the first 60 minutes when we already have high levels of cortisol might be a strategy that people can utilize.
Yeah, I want to talk about caffeine in a second. But that's cool to hear you. I always wondered about that because I had heard that and I subjectively like it makes sense. So when you talk about like it might seem counterintuitive to do something warm prior to bed when you're wanting to get cool with bed. Yeah, I guess the way I understood is like when you heat your body up, your body's always wanting to maintain homeostasis, right? And so from the outside, when you're heating it up, the inside to counterbalance and find homeostasis, is it true that the inside then is like going to trigger a cooling effect? Is that what's happening then to kind of find that balance? Is that the
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there is validity to that. That's not like a crock of shit I've been telling myself. Like that actually there's truth to that.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
great. So on the caffeine side, you talked about how maybe it's smart to avoid caffeine within the first hour of waking up. I'd heard maybe even 90 minutes, but tell us about why that's important and overall how does caffeine hurt or possibly even help sleep? I don't know if it ever could, but like how does caffeine play a role with sleep?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
As I drink a caffeinated tea here. I don't do a lot of caffeine, but this is it's like 30 milligrams, but I wait as much as I can past the 90-minute mark, but I think you're gonna tell people why.
yes, yes. Well, as I mentioned, cortisol is high when we awake or when we're awake in the morning. And then it kind of dissipates, after that 60 to 90 minutes. So caffeine helps increase cortisol. And so by having, let's say we were to reach for our cup of coffee right away upon awakening, you're already at a high cortisol level. So that's why it may be optimal to delay that caffeine use because we don't want too much cortisol where our body is really stressed early in the morning. And so that's why it might be useful to delay that a bit.
Right.
Um, for me, or I mean, for anyone out there, we want to, of course, watch our caffeine intake and avoid caffeine typically after 11 a.m., noon. That's where we want to start to limit our caffeine intake. Maybe a green tea or something in the afternoon. And of course, play around with it yourself
Sure.
because all of us metabolize caffeine very differently.
Right.
But in general, if we are drinking caffeine in the late afternoon, we'll see just overall decreases in sleep quality. And it may even be something that you wouldn't necessarily notice on your own. Um, there was a study in teenagers where they gave them an energy drink at dinner time and the teens didn't report subjectively feeling any worse. They did fall asleep within a reasonable amount of time. They didn't um stay awake for long periods. To them subjectively they thought they slept fine with the energy drink versus without, but when you looked at the EEG, the brainwave activity, there were definitely decreases in deep sleep, overall just slow wave activity throughout the night. So that's something to keep in mind too. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I can have a coffee at 8 p.m. at dinner time and it doesn't impact my sleep." But in reality, it very well could be
Right.
on that really fine-grained level.
Right. Subjectively, they might not notice something, but objectively,
Hmm.
most likely it's going to be affecting the data. Uh, cool. Yeah, I had also heard that like having caffeine too close to waking can cause the crash, like the caffeine crash
Mm-hmm.
later on too.
Oh,
Uh,
one more thing about caffeine too. I
yeah.
mean, especially since your audience is elite athletes, there has been some work. I mentioned we all metabolize caffeine very differently. There are certain genotypes that are slow metabolizers of caffeine.
Right.
And so there was a study by Nancy Guest, Dr. Nancy Guest, where they did a cycling time trial and they basically gave everyone caffeine an hour before the time trial. And then they looked at the genotypes and how they metabolize caffeine. And they found that actually the slow metabolizers of caffeine actually performed worse with caffeine on the time trial. And it could have been that if they would have maybe delayed the time trial by more than an hour, that maybe it would have improved the time trial performance. But it was interesting that um, you know, depending on how you metabolize caffeine, it may or may not improve your performance.
Right. And is that a genetic mutation then? A gene?
Yeah, it's the
Right.
it's the CYP A2A. Um, let
Got
me
it.
just let me just make sure there. Um,
Because I've done my raw genetics, and I've uploaded it to a couple different, third parties to make sense of the mutations, like Genetic Genie, and then I originally went through 23andMe before I realized, they were selling data to God knows who. Um, but I Nutrition Genome's another one, but I haven't specifically looked at that SNP for myself.
Yes,
Um,
no, you should absolutely look at it. So CYP1A to 1A are rapid caffeine metabolizers, but if you're part of the slow CYP1A to 1F are slow caffeine metabolizers. So
got it.
definitely check that out to see
Yeah,
how you respond.
100%. Yeah. Are there other genetic SNPs or mutations that are relevant and important from an overall, sleep optimization standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, there's genetic mutations related to being an evening type or a morning type, for example. So, chronotype is kind of our underlying biological preference for being a morning type versus an evening type. And what we see in general is that evening types have a more challenging time when it comes to performance, like even academic performance, if we're looking at students, mental health issues, because they're just at a mismatch with how society runs. So, society wants us to be awake early, um, you know, for work and school. So, the evening types have a little bit of a harder time when it comes to being at risk for health problems. However, when you look at shift work, they're actually more protective at the detrimental impacts of shift work. So it can help or hurt you depending on your situation.
Interesting. Yeah. Chronotype. Is that like Dr. Michael Bruce? Did he write the book? Or am I thinking someone else?
I'm not a huge fan of his work,
But did he
to
write
be
the book
honest,
about,
because
he wrote, was he the one that wrote the book about chronotypes though?
I think so. I think
Okay.
he has uh,
A couple.
five or
Yeah.
six different types of chronotypes and a fox and a bear a fish. I
Right.
don't even
Exactly.
know all
Exactly.
these
Yeah.
different animals, but it's not necessarily based in science. And
Ah,
so what when we talk about chronotype, there's three main types. There's evening type, morning type, and then intermediate types. So somewhere in between.
Got it.
So the only animals I'm talking about are owl, night owl, and morning lark. So
Yeah. Okay.
those are the legit animal
Yeah.
chronotypes.
All right. All right. Good to know. Good to know. Um, so let's talk a little bit more about like, because I bet a lot of your clients, well, of the high performers or athletes that you're working with probably already have some sort of wearable maybe when they come to you, right? They might already have like a Oura ring or a Whoop. Um, who knows how well they're, using the data to build a feedback loop, and, and who knows how accurate all that data is. So what's the process like of like looking at your medical grade data with the, call it, lifestyle data from the Oura ring? Um, is there a process that you guys take to kind of help people make sense of how to live based on their, day-to-day lifestyle data? Or like what's that process like for like optimizing, the actual habits and the lifestyle with taking into account the medical grade data that you're capturing? Because it's obviously very, very expensive technology that you guys are using that can really lead to, kind of cracking the code of what's going on.
Yeah, combining the two, I think, is key because if we were to just take, it's probably not feasible to use full polysomnography in the home for, a month at a time, for example. And so combining the two types of data, I think, is key. The overnight polysomnography, and at Absolute Rest, we do 2 nights of that. So we don't just
Okay.
do one night that you would get in a laboratory because sleep can differ from night to night. So we're doing 2 nights of data, and we're combining it with wearable data such as Aura. So, for example, we're going to look at what time they went to bed with polysomnography, how long it took them to fall asleep. But that may not be an accurate reflection of what's been happening, at least, let's say, bedtime, for example, over the past 6 months. So we're going to
Right.
also incorporate Aura data
Mhm.
or Whoop data or Fitbit data to really kind of get a sense. Okay, it looks like your normal bedtime across 3 months is X, and your average wake time across 3 months is Y. And
Mhm.
we might, make recommendations to adjust that. Whereas if we're just looking at polysomnography and EEG on those 2 nights, we may not get as good of a picture
Yeah,
as to what
you're
time they're going to sleep, what time they're waking up.
right. Yeah, your clients might be trying to, have the best routine possible and be really dialed in for epic polysomnograph data, for those 2 nights. But that, like you said, isn't a longitudinal snapshot of like what is typical across, multiple months.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are there any data points on the Aura Ring app, that the Aura Ring provides that you feel are more accurate than some of the others? Like, cause, I look at my Aura Ring every morning, or, the result data, and I'm and the night before, like, I mean, I'm generally motivated, to have a smart evening routine, to prepare for, the next day and get a great sleep score, to be honest, and a great readiness score. Like that's I used to work with a health data technology company. We had competitions and it was like a fun camaraderie thing. But like, I had an 88 on my readiness today and I think an 82 in my sleep. And I mean, there's just a lot of data here, from resting heart rate to, you know, temperature deviation, heart rate variability, respiratory rate, and then of course all the sleep stages, REM, deep,
Hmm.
etc. What's your take on, what data is kind of more accurate, the Oura Ring and
Well, the research shows that with wearable data at this point, that total sleep time or sleep duration is one of the most accurate pieces of data that we're going to get from
Okay.
these wearable devices. When it comes to the sleep stages, there's a lot left to be desired there. When we're looking at the research and comparing sleep stages with wearable device to polysomnography.
Mhm.
Now, I will say that Oura Ring actually has a new algorithm which helps in that area, so they're definitely getting more accurate.
Good.
However, I think the link with habits and lifestyle factors is missing.
Mm.
Um, from a lot of these devices. And I think Whoop is trying to lead the area when it comes to different lifestyle factors and how that impacts sleep. Now, um, I will say that the the functional relevance of the amount of REM sleep versus the amount of deep sleep isn't quite there yet anyway. So even if these devices were 100% accurate, uh, there's not a lot of like connection between deep sleep and daytime functioning or REM sleep and daytime functioning. There's a little bit there,
Uh-huh.
but we just kind of got to be aware of those limitations.
Got it.
And another thing I want to point out is orthosomnia, which is kind of that obsession with a good night's sleep. And so you competing with others may be great for certain personality types, but there may
Right.
be other personality types where they're very anxious. They really believe that the data they're looking at is accurate, number one, and that score will then lead to my overall daytime performance. So you got to be careful with certain individuals, and in some of the athletes that I'm working with, we'll actually turn off the data
Mm.
if it's the day of a competition, for example, because we don't want a poor night's sleep, a poor score affecting how they think they're going to perform.
Mm. That's such a great point. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, yeah. That's really, really important, because last thing you want to do is stress out about being perfect with your
Mm-hmm.
sleep. That's the opposite goal of a great night's sleep, of being relaxed, recovered, etc. Okay, yeah. In general, I had heard that like REM sleep. Well, I have heard that. Well, one person had told me based on the data that who I used to work with, um, he was early on with Aura Ring, and then with this other company, said that there's no such thing as deep sleep, that there's only REM and non-REM. And so like, deep sleep is this thing that's been manufactured of in our society, and there's not a ton of clinical relevance, or like, I don't know. What
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of, maybe, is there any truth to that, or like, is that what you mean when it's kind of murky? You can't just kind of trust that, REM sleep is REM sleep, deep is deep. It's not like as clear as that.
Yeah, I mean, if take for example, so I was involved in scoring the different sleep stages using EEG data, eye data, eye movement data, muscle data. So taking into consideration multiple electrodes that are showing us what's on the screen, and then scoring that 30 seconds of data for each of these stages of sleep. And I was a registered polysomnographic technologist, the highest level that you can get at. But the way I score sleep may be different from another RPSGT who has a different opinion.
Mm.
And so, usually only about 80% of the time, probably even less. Like if we took two amazing scores, they would agree about 80% of the time. And so there's a lot of subjectivity. And I think that also relates to our brain isn't doing the same thing across the entire brain. Our neurons aren't firing in the exact same way. And so there may be instances where I fall asleep quicker, on the left side than I do on the right side. So it brings a lot of subjectivity into these stages. But you are correct. We do have non-REM and REM sleep, but non-REM sleep is further divided into depths, with non-REM stage one being the lightest stage of sleep, taking up about 5% of our sleep time across the night. Non-REM 2 taking up about 50% of our sleep time. And then non-REM 3, where growth hormone is primarily being released. It would be very difficult to awaken someone during that stage, is what we call deep
Deep.
sleep,
Okay.
So there is
Got
ways
it.
to categorize it, but at the same time, it's not unequivocal.
Sure. That's good to know. All right, cool. Great. So we talked a little bit about some of the habits that we can do, like a warm bath, warm shower, or sauna, like an hour before bed, that ironically trigger the body to cool down for deep sleep early in during sleep. What are some other habits that you're a big fan of, either doing or not doing? Like when I was doing a lot of coaching, I would, one of my triggers for people to like take ownership of their own behavior change was like empower them to choose, like, you know, uh, not just things to do more of, but like things to do less of or to stop doing, right? So like what are the good to focus more on, and what are like the bad to kind of limit in terms of
Hmm.
effective overall sleep?
Yes. I mean, what we do during the day influences how we sleep at night. So we need to not just think about an hour before bedtime, what should I be doing?
Right.
We need to think about everything during the day. What can I do to optimize sleep at night? So exercise is going to help decrease stress levels, potentially help improve deep sleep at night. So that's one thing we can keep in mind. Um, Other ways to reduce stress. So for those people who are more anxious, potentially having a worry journal that they're doing well before sleep. Taking 10 minutes, doing that worry journal, and then putting it away. Meditation, those kind of techniques can help. And then as we approach sleep, we want to have a good pre-sleep routine that we can utilize if we're at home or on the road. So taking that warm bath or shower, putting away those electronic devices, even writing a to-do list. So offloading those thoughts off your mind right before bedtime, surprisingly has shown to be more effective than just journaling about your day. And it helps kind of offload those thoughts, gets them on paper, and then makes it easier for you to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. Reading a paper book, and then I think
Wait, reading
incorporating,
reading a paper book?
yes, paper, no tablet or
Kindles
yeah,
are bad.
Kindle. I mean, if you have it in the mode where there is a mode where
There's a
you
no blue
can
light. Is that what
dim,
you're
yeah,
yeah.
dim
Right.
the light. So that might be okay. But yeah,
It's
I
still
mean,
technology, so I know what you mean. It can still be
hmm,
stimulative. Yeah.
yeah, potentially.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh,
Continue.
that's okay. Another thing is to have good breathing techniques to help activate the parasympathetic nervous system. For example, 4-7-8 breathing, where you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7, breathe out for 8. And the key, any kind of breathing technique where you're exhaling longer than you're inhaling, is going to help activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And then having a cognitive technique. So I really like potentially the cognitive color, the cognitive shuffle. So the cognitive shuffle is where you think of a word such as bedtime and you imagine all the objects you can, starting with the first letter. So ball, baby, bus, banana, and you're imagining these objects in your mind, which helps simulate what you do when you fall asleep, but it just keeps your mind just preoccupied enough so that you're not angry that you're not falling asleep. Um, so you think of the first letter, all those objects. So B, then you move on to the next letter, E, eagle, egg, ear, and you keep moving on through that letter. and hopefully you'll be sound asleep. I actually modified that for my kids who earlier, couldn't be able to spell. So I just told them to pick a color and think of objects related to that color. So red, raspberry, strawberry, red shirt, red table, any even doesn't have to be specific to that color, but even like a red plate or something, for example. And so, yeah, that doing that breathing technique, doing that cognitive technique, which you can do if you wake up in the middle of the night or if you're having issues falling asleep. And the key with the middle of the night wake up is we don't want to start to associate our bed with being awake. So we want to do that breathing technique, do that cognitive technique, and then if you're still awake, get up out of bed and only return back to bed when you're sleepy. So yeah, those are a few things people can kind of incorporate to their daily routine, which will help them get more optimal sleep.
Wow, those are great tips, and some of which hadn't heard before. I like the worry journal. I could see that having some value for sure, and the tasks like right before bed, like writing the to-do list was an
Hmm.
interesting one. Um, that seems counterintuitive, but like it would cause things to be thought of, but also, it's on paper, it's out of your mind, you
Hmm.
can move on from it. And then, yeah, those are a couple that I wanna try, and of course, light also plays like a huge role of an overall circadian rhythm. And you mentioned earlier about how it's not just the hour before bed; it's what you do throughout the day. So, talk to me about the importance of our relationship with light, whether it's the sun or fire or candles, or I've got artificial blue light all over me right now to make me look as good as possible during this podcast. Um, and or red light therapy, et cetera. Like, so how do you see light affecting circadian rhythm and overall ability to get great sleep?
Thank you for bringing that up because that is a very important tool that people can utilize as well. Light is our number one Zeitgeber. It's our number one photic cue for our brain to be awake or asleep. So getting lots of light in the morning helps reduce that melatonin. It sets us up for a good night's sleep at night. So they find that people who they looked at office workers and they looked at those who were close to a window versus those who were in a cubicle. And they found that those who were close to a window actually got better sleep at night versus those who didn't have a lot of light exposure. The morning is especially important, but I think light throughout the day is important as well. And we want to get more of that white light, full spectrum light in the morning. And then as we approach the evening, we want to get the blue light out of there and move more towards the amber or the red light as we approach bedtime. Um, yeah. So one other point there too is we do want to get light outside because if you look, for example, I took a reading of my lux levels, my light levels indoors, and I was only at 200 lux inside, but got outside on a cloudy day and it was up to 20,000 lux. So that's another really important point for people to consider is to get outside because it's so much brighter. It has those light colors that we need to prepare our mind and our body for sleep. And I have a couple videos on my Instagram too, where I talk specifically about light exposure, where people can check that out as
Oh,
well.
cool. Awesome. What's your Instagram?
It's at Sleep for Sport, the number four.
Awesome. At sleep for the number four sport. So if you're an athlete or another high performer that's wanting to take advantage of anything and everything that you've learned today and watch some of these videos about the effect and power of light, check out Amy's Instagram, Sleep for Sport. That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear you talk about the effect of light. I was uh, outside today. I think another thing is people just in general might be just a little bit afraid of the sun because of what we've been told. Like, oh, I gotta throw all this SPF on to protect me from this thing that's gonna give me cancer, or I need to have sunglasses with polarized lenses to protect me from the bad rays. But like our eyeballs actually need. I mean, of course, throughout the day, like the sun changes, and it might be a lot to take on or take in, and you definitely don't want to get burnt from the sun. But the importance of getting sunlight in your eyeballs, um, for the circadian rhythm, and then being mindful of getting the right source of light at night, like you said, avoiding that blue light, the artificial blue light, and instead focusing on kind of that more red, the more amber. Um, you should see our place at night. Like we've got if you drove by our house at night, people would be like, "Oh, there's the red light district," like we probably have like 8 to 10 red light bulbs on our 3 levels of our house.
That's great.
And we do our best to, like be as dialed in as possible there and wear blue blockers if needed,
Hmm.
if we're in airports and traveling and whatnot. But
I think when I saw you because we met at a conference, I think you were wearing blue blockers.
I was. Now it was during the day, and we did talk about that a bit. But yeah, there sure is a lot of artificial light in those conference rooms. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, great. Well, I know we're coming towards the end here. I want to ask a couple more key questions here. Um, what are some of your regarding food and supplements? Um, what are some of the things to avoid there and or focus on, in terms of getting great sleep, like in terms of like what to eat or avoid eating before bed and or what supplements to take to help sleep? Like what are some of your favorites there?
Hmm. I'm a big fan of magnesium, especially magnesium glycinate, which glycinate on its own has been shown to improve sleep quality. Magnesium can help kind of shut the mind off, kind of get rid of that wired type of feeling. So that's why I really like magnesium. And so many of us are deficient in magnesium as well. So, definitely something to consider. Um, Vitamin D is also important as it relates to sleep. So we need to make sure we have proper vitamin D levels. I also like tart cherry because there's been a lot of research to show that that can help promote melatonin, help increase melatonin. And so I'm a big fan of tart cherry, and that also helps reduce inflammation as well in a lot of the athletes that I'm working with too. So that's a good one. Ashwagandha has some promising results. Chamomile. Yeah, so it's about optimizing those, maybe not taking them every single night, but when you really need them. Magnesium, you may need that because you're deficient, but really trying to, I believe supplements are good in certain instances. So, uh, those are pretty much my go-to.
Cool.
When it comes to food, a lot of I mean, we definitely need more research in this area. So it's not super definitive, but based on the research that I know, having a small snack with protein, carbs before bedtime may be good for athletes in particular who could be waking up due to low blood sugar levels. So, doing the fasting for an athlete, not having anything after dinner may not be a good idea depending on the person. So I'm not opposed to a small snack with carbs, protein, maybe a little bit of fat, but we don't want to have a huge steak dinner meal, obviously, because then we're
Right.
going to be like focused on digesting versus resting.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, timing all makes a difference. And but you make me feel better about having my plantain chips and beef jerky last night.
There
It
you
was about
go.
an hour before bed. And I mean, it makes sense, like, uh, one of the things we've done is like, we have this famous sleepy time recovery ice cream that we make for athletes.
Oh, I want to try it.
I know. I'd love to. It's hard to bring to conferences, right? We need like a portable freezer, but it's powerful. We stack with a bunch of great proteins and fats. It's generally low in carbs, but there's good sugars. We use honey, and the brain can use the sugar while it's sleeping, and then we stack like magnesium, a lot of reishi,
Oh,
deep
oh
sleep,
yes,
and
yes.
then occasionally we'll play with some NSF certified for sport, CBD. But we'd love to have you try that sometime. We've heard good things from our clients. But overall, I know we're at time here. I really appreciate you being on the show, Amy, and thanks for everything that you've shared with us. And how can people stay in touch with you and Absolute Rest? What's a good next step for them?
Yes, I think so. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter at Sleep for Sport, which we already mentioned. I do have a website, sleepintowin.com, and definitely checking out Absolute Rest as well. I think it's just absoluterest.com.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thanks again, Amy, and look forward to talking again soon.
Okay, thank you so much.